If you've ever struggled with capturing reflections in watercolor, you are not alone. I've been there too, especially with this one called Bunker Harbor. But today I'm going to share with you how I turn those challenges into this painting, from tricky reflections to perfecting some shadows and some boats. I've got some tips that I think will save you some time and frustration. So let's jump in and tackle this watercolor hurdle together. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm really excited to take you along as I paint a beautiful scene of Bunker Harbor in Winterport, Maine. Now this piece has been a fun but a challenging project, and I'll be sharing some of those challenges with you today, especially when it comes to those reflections, those shadows, and adding in those little delicate boats, right? But before we dive in, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my Patreon members. Your support means the world to me, helps me continue to create and share these tutorials with you all. And if you're not already a member, I'd love to have you join our community. This is where I share exclusive content, behind the scenes looks at my process, and more in-depth tutorials with like real time. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. So I started off with sketching it in. I did a very light wash of peach, and now I'm going in with a little bit of that bright, bold rose, opera rose color, just to pop out that background a little bit. Remember, with watercolor, when it dries lighter. I also opted to add a little bit of purple down there. It's almost like a blue hue in the picture, but I always like to add my own little spin. I love purple and peaches together. So now I'm going to go ahead and just do a very light wash of my background trees. So there's really not a lot of light that shows through this painting. So I'm going to try to keep it a little bit lighter than what the photograph is. And I will say thank you to Kellie West, who took this photograph of Bunker Harbor. And this was hilarious. I was actually sitting there eating at Bunker Harbor restaurant when I was in Maine recently. And I'm like, man, this view looks really familiar. Well, I had never been there before. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I painted this one. So that was really fun. So I, again, went in with a big brush, just kind of did a light wash, and now I'm going to add some details to that. And you may notice I'm using my dagger brush. Again, this is a great brush. I can get the tops of those trees really well with the point, and then I can turn it sideways and just fill in some of those other areas. And I'm trying to leave some of that lighter green in there. Remember, the painting or the picture photograph is almost black, but that's the great thing about painting. You have your own artistic flair or your own style or your own color appreciations. You don't have to make it just like that photograph. Remember that. So I'm just pumping it in here, filling in some of those little areas. Again, I've got some dark greens, some light greens. I absolutely love to mix my own greens. Very rarely do I use a green right out of the tube or out of the pan. But most of the time I will make it, especially for the darker one. Maybe for the first wash, I'll do a little bit more of the yellow tint to the greens. And then as I get darker and sharing some of those darker shadows and values, then I will switch and add either a blue, like an ultramarine blue, or maybe even some type of brown, like a burnt umber or raw sienna, something like that, to deepen the greens a little bit more and have them lean towards more of the darker shadow colors. So a lot of times you'll see I have both in there, and wherever the light hits is where that yellow, brighter, warmer tone is, and then wherever those shadows are going to be where the blue or the brown toned greens will be. And then once I get most of those basic shapes in there, this is when I start to do a little bit of detailing. Again, a very dark shade of the green, and I'm using the tip of the brush again to create the tops of those trees, giving a little bit more definition. And once that dries, you can add a little bit more to the layers on this. I even get darker. Sometimes I'll even add a little bit of a darker color, like a grape or dark purple, um, just to change it up a little bit, just to get another value in there. And then I added a little bit of white to this one too, just so I can lighten up some of those areas, maybe a little brown, trying to get that kind of a soft and misty color. And I'm going to put in just a few little trees over here, like maybe you can see that there are some lighter trees in the background. I love to do birch trees. That's my favorite. I don't think those are birch back there, but they're just either trees that no longer have leaves on them, or maybe the wind has taken it, and it's an older tree with just bark, and you're not seeing any leaves, or it could be a birch. We just make it up as we go. And then just again dotting a little bit here just to soften some of that so it's not so bright, and get another little value in here with a little bit of that gouache on there just to soften things. And when I'm working with my painting, I tend to work from top to bottom. I did do that whole first layer into the water first because I want it to reflect in the sky, and it's just easier to do that on the first wash. But you can see how pale it is. So now I'm just starting to detail a little bit more with the rocks. Again, I love to use my own black, and I'll do that by mixing some blues and some browns together to make a more natural looking black. But if you don't have, or if you can't get it dark enough, if you're just working with watercolor, sometimes it's really hard to get the darker pigment. That's one of the things you want to practice a little bit, because obviously the more water you use, it's going to thin out your pigments and it's going to make it look more gray or lighter. So this is less water, more pigment, and you can get nice color. Now you can see it's a little bit lighter here. I've added a little bit of water to that, maybe even a little gouache to get myself a little gray shade. But again, if you don't have like a black gouache, or you don't want to work with gouache to get a really sharp looking dark value for that black, mixing up some dark blues, some dark browns will give that to you as well. I had a hard time with was those reflections. Reflections are one of those things that can really make or break a watercolor painting, especially in a harbor scene like this. And the water in Bunker Harbor has like a certain stillness to it, but at the same time, there are those little subtle ripples that kind of catch the light just right. And I really struggled a bit with getting those reflections in there, and using the surrounding landscape, making it look natural. It's really easy to overwork the water or to make it look too uniform. So what I found helpful is to use that lighter touch, let the watercolor do some of the work for you, letting it flow and blend to create those soft natural reflections. And then I just kind of went back in with some of the white. Now I've used bleed proof white. I've also used white gouache. If you want to do mixed media and you don't have either one of those, you could always use watered down acrylic paint. Just keep in mind though, you cannot change it once that dries. The thing about watercolor gouache or bleed proof white is that it does reactivate. So if you have a hard time with it, you can always take it out. It is, however, opaque, so just be mindful of that. When you do attempt to take it out, it will leave a little bit of that opaqueness, or it will tint your watercolor underneath. So you can see I've got some lighter green shades in here as well. So I like using this because I know I can play around with it a little bit. It's not permanent. And on the structures around the harbor. So shadows in watercolor can be really tricky because you need to balance them with that brightness and transparency that the medium is known for. And what's worked for me was layering different shades gradually. I started with a very light wash and then slowly built up on those darker tones. It's important to pay attention to the direction of your light source and how that's going to affect everything in the scene, from the boats to the water and even to those reflections. And there is a lot of movement, a lot of light in here on this particular painting. Challenges was trying to get the movement of that water in those shadow areas. So it's almost black in the picture, or the paint, not in the painting, in the picture itself. So I did tend to go a little bit darker for this one, but you still can see that cast of light, that brightness or that transparency in there by using that lighter shade of green. All right, let's now talk about those floats. They're small, but they are a crucial element in the scene, and getting them right did take me some time. What's tricky about painting the floats is in watercolors, capturing that elegance of the boat or the lightness without making them look too rigid or even too loose. So I had to rework one of the boats a couple of times because it was either too blocky or the shape wasn't right or wasn't defined enough. And I found that using that fine brush and working slowly again really helped me achieve the right balance. And it did take me some time. And don't forget, though, that even though they're small, they still need to follow that same rules of the lights, the shadows, as everything else in your painting, especially when you're looking at that reflection down below. Again, I wanted to make sure I continue to have that movement in there. So that was my final challenge, and this is the final painting of Bunker Harbor. I hope you enjoyed seeing the process, and maybe you picked up a few things along the way. Again, painting reflections, shadows, tiny sailboats, it can all be a challenge, but with practice, honestly, it does get easier. And if you're interested in diving in deeper with watercolor techniques, I'd love for you to check out my watercolor affinity courses. The first course covers all the basics to get you started in watercolor. And the second course, Watercolor Affinity 2, takes you more into that advanced technique. And we do a little bit of playing around, a little bit of tackling different types of projects. So it's a really fun one. So thanks for joining me today. Make sure you click that like and subscribe button, and happy painting.